Finally, video from the MIT anti-war conference in January. Pardis Cabré, a lawyer who works with prisoners at Guantanamo.
So, as was said, I represent several of the men who are now facing their 9th year of detention in Guantanamo. Guantanamo is not closed to anyone who isn't aware. Despite candidate Obama's promise, President Obama's order, it's still not closed. But before we get into the discussion about detention policies and policies about targeting who we can detain, who we can kill, who we can torture in the war on terror that are continuing under Obama, I just want to take a minute in our kind of heady discussion and analysis to remember some of the casualties of the war on terror that we're here for today, and why our work is so critical for them. And I just want to mention a client of mine who is sitting in Guantanamo as we sit here now, again facing his 9th year of detention without charge, whose case has not been reviewed by a court of law yet. He's a Syrian man. His name is Abdul Nasser Khantoumani. He's 50. He looks about 30 years older than his age because of the detention and torture he's been through. He's been separated from his family in Syria for 8 years. He cannot return to Syria and is stuck in Guantanamo like about 40 to 50 other men because of the stigma of Guantanamo, because of the risk that's created if he were to go back to his home country, and the targeting and arbitrary detention and torture he might be subject to there. So he's stuck until a third country is willing to come forward, and he's why I'm here. He's what motivates me to continue doing this work even when it's so hard. So I don't have much to say that's nice about President Obama, and with the story of Abdul Nasser in mind, I just want to talk about the policies that are continuing under Obama, that existed under Bush, despite the change that was promised, relating to who we can detain and target and kill even in this global war on terror, and to argue in our panel about debunking the war on terror, that the policies that exist today are not at all meaningfully different than what existed before. I don't need to tell the people in this room that there is a wide perception outside of this room that we've got a constitutional law professor now in office, and that the worst excesses and abuses that happened under Bush are now taken care of, and that those days are over, and they are not. So I'm going to start with just talking a little bit about Guantanamo, and then I'll move to, Guantanamo is just the tip of what we're talking about. There are many other detention sites that exist in a network, and I'll talk about Bagram that still holds 600 to 700 people right now, much in conditions that existed in the early days of Guantanamo. And then I want to talk about not just detention, but how we're targeting and killing people now under a claimed authority to use military force in this war on terror. And then in terms of continuities, the last point I want to just make is about the continuity in fighting and obstructing efforts for any kind of accountability for the torture and abuses that have occurred in the past, and what Obama is doing in that way. So starting with Guantanamo, Obama had this very bold, very hopeful announcement on the second day of office over a year ago today, announcing that he was going to close Guantanamo within a year. It should have been done by now. He had a row of veteran military officers standing behind him as he signed his executive order saying, Guantanamo will be closed 1 year from today. In reality, there are still nearly 200 people who are detained, most of whom, again, have never been charged with any crime or facing their 9th year of detention. I thought I would be out of a job by now, and I'm not. At this point, the administration maintains that it still hopes to or intends to close Guantanamo, but there is no definite date for closure. And I think I remember reading a report by an anonymous official who said, we hope it'll be done in his first term, Obama's first term. So in my mind, my analysis is just a lot of questions about when this is ever going to be over, even if we're talking about a very small group of people right now in Guantanamo. And not only has the deadline been missed for various reasons, but for example, just recently, one of the things that's contributing to any meaningful future progress towards closing Guantanamo is a recent announcement by President Obama to halt all transfers of Yemeni detainees back to their home country. This was a purely political response to opportunistic calls for Guantanamo to stay open and not to close in response to the underwear bomber on Christmas, the attempted attack on Christmas Day. What that means is that of the 200 or so people who remain in Guantanamo, nearly half of them are Yemeni. And with this decision to halt transfers of Yemenis, any Yemeni for the indefinite future back to Yemen, that just effectively means that we're not going to be able to make any progress towards closure anytime soon. And what's problematic here again is the starting point, this presumption of guilt as our starting point, as our premise. These are men who have not been charged. They have not been tried. The allegations against them, for the most part, have not still been reviewed by a court of law, even though they have that right, because of delays in the court cases and because judges are actually not standing up. It's not just the administration, it's the courts as well. Those allegations have not been reviewed yet, and these are men who, I thought the presumption was innocence until proven guilty. That is not at all the case here, and so these men are going to, nearly half the population is going to remain stuck in Guantanamo until the United States decides to lift its ban on transfers to Yemen. Separate from closing the facility, though, the answer, closing the actual facility is obviously not what's meaningful. The answer is not just transferring detainees to another federal supermaximum facility in Thompson, Illinois. The answer is obviously ending the policies of indefinite detention without charge that gave rise to Guantanamo. And what's been doubly worrying about this missed deadline and the fact that hundreds of men are still sitting in Guantanamo right now is a new announcement that just came up a week ago, or last week, I think, by President Obama, actually on the anniversary of his his missed deadline, that January 22nd, when the prison was supposed to be closed, when he announced very concretely a plan to continue to hold indefinitely, without charge, a group of men who he has deemed too dangerous to release, but where there's not sufficient credible evidence that would stand up in court where he could charge them. And what that means essentially is that all the evidence that exists against these people essentially has been obtained through torture and forced confessions and wouldn't stand up in a court of law. So there is now this third category of people. It's a very scary proposition to hold people on the basis of an executive determination that they're too dangerous for things they have not committed yet. What's doubly deceptive, and why we really need to arm ourselves with the facts and really do a deeper analysis than we could under Bush, than we needed to under Bush, because those policies were so blatantly messed up and illegal that it was easier to kind of talk about those. We're not in that land anymore. We're not in this Bush-era land of combatant status review tribunals where detainees were held without access to a lawyer, where they were held on the basis of secret allegations, where decisions about their detention were made by military officers who were in the direct chain of command to Donald Rumsfeld. That's not what exists here anymore. These men, who the United States is deeming to hold indefinitely because they're too dangerous, actually have the right to go to court and get a review of their detention. That's what we've been asking for years. But what's dangerous is not the process piece of it anymore. It's the very basis that the government, Obama, is continuing to claim as authority for being able to detain people. And that's what's been mentioned before. This framework of conceptualizing what's going on as a global war allows the United States government authority to target, pick up, detain, capture, kill anyone, anywhere in the world that it deems to be a threat, not just anyone it says has directly participated in any kind of violent act or hostility, but anyone who has supported those acts. And that definition of support can be very broad. But authority to capture and detain and kill people anywhere in the world and hold them for the duration of hostilities. Well, duration of hostilities, as we know in this war, is indefinite, generations. And that's the authority that's being claimed with this new announcement by Obama to continue with this third group of people. Like I said, right now we're talking about 50 people, and it's a messed up policy for one person, but it's a policy that could conceivably encompass many more people, citizens and non-citizens alike.